Hi everyone, welcome to the Scale Up Thursdays webinar. Today's topic is going the distance. We are going to talk about how to turn painful problems into prolific products, and a little bit about the topic in a little more detail before I introduce the speaker. In our experience building products and aiding businesses, we realize the importance of forming a machinery not only to produce great software time and again, but also to serve consumer goals and quickly to advance organizational goals. So today, Dhruv is going to present the Going the Distance, which is an 8-step framework that is the response to the most common challenges organizations counter in their journey to create disruptive technology. A little bit about Dhruv. Dhruv Saxena is the co-founder and chief product officer at Obvious. It's a strategic consultancy that partners with businesses to create digital experiences across a wide range of domains and industries. Obvious employs technology as a force multiplier to devise disruptive, business-driven, and measurable interventions that positively influence business metrics for the clients. And since inception, they have helped create several of Southeast Asia's unicorn startups. Some of them being household names like Flipkart, Gojek, Myntra. So if you have used any of these apps, you have actually been touched by Obvious's work. So I think it's great to have them here. And just before I hand it over to Dhruv, I quickly want to talk about the social media challenge. Just give me a second. So as you can see on the screen now, the social media challenge is where you can post about the event on your social media on Twitter. Make sure you use this hashtag #ScaleUpThursdays, and when you use this hashtag, we will be able to see it. And the best tweet that we like, we will win a swag bag from Microsoft or startup. So we'll get in touch with you, and we'll declare the winner for the social media challenge towards the end. You can keep your questions coming on the chat window, and as soon as you are done with as soon as you ask the question, what we'll do is we'll take all of the questions towards the end of the webinar. So with that, over to you, Dhruv, for you to take us to the framework called Going the Distance.
Thanks a lot, Vinayak. Am I audible? Just doing a quick sound check before we start.
Yes, you are audible.
Great. Cool. So, and thanks for that lovely introduction. I don't know if we deserve the praise yet, but feels good to hear all of that. So I'll get started. Like Vinayak mentioned, I'm a co-founder at Obvious, and we're a strategic product design and engineering consulting firm, which has helped build some of the flagship products within the Indian startup ecosystem, and a little bit in the Southeast Asian startup ecosystem as well. So if you are in India, you've probably touched some of our work. And today I'm about to give away what has been our sort of recipe for success for building the products that we have. And we call this framework Going the Distance. And the framework really is nothing but just a series of steps. Of course, it's not as linear as it looks, but it's about these 8 steps that if an organization pays attention to, they can build products which are not only great and solve customer problems, but they can continue to stay relevant. So it starts with discover, which is about owning the problem, and goes up to investigation, which is about owning the solution. Then we go into strategy, and how do you convert that strategy into a tactical action plan, which is translate. And then once you have that plan, how do you go and accomplish the work that needs to be done to launch the product? And once the product is out, what do you do? And how do you own the improvements that have to be made to that product? And likewise, if you're lucky and if you hit that scale, then what do you do with that scale? And how do you continue to sort of leverage the hard work that you have put in already to really expand and explode the product? And eventually, how do you stay relevant and how do you continue to evolve it? So I'll jump right in. Step 1, which is about discovery. And what is discovery really about? It's about finding the most interesting problems which are worth solving. Unless you're really serving a customer need where they feel a pain point, it's unlikely that you will build a product that stays relevant for long. So it all starts with discovering the right set of problems. And why would you make an investment in discovery? So that you can not only make something that people want, but you can continuously make something that people continue to want to have, right? Um, and how do you get to that? So we look at discovery as a three-step process. And of course, like I said before, it's not as linear as it sounds. But as long as you do something about each of these steps, your product is likely going to be in a good shape. Uh, the first step in this framework is what we call contextualization, which is about understanding the context, where you go deep into the product's potential environment as well as understand how people interact with the product or potentially would interact with the product within their environment. And two good methods to sort of make that happen are to start out with some secondary research and ethnographic research. And of course, there are a plethora of methods. I'm not in this talk, I'm not going to go into the methods as much. I'll share the slide deck later, and you can really search for these methods, and a lot has already been written about them. I'm going to focus largely on telling stories where we have invested in some of these methods and what has that resulted into. Moving on, the second step is identify, which is once you've understood the context, how do you use it to identify the right set of problems to be solved? And once you have captured the problems that you want to solve, how do you prioritize them in an interesting way? And you want to solve them consistently, but you also want to continue to solve them in the future. So how do you build a research funnel, and how do you prioritize the problems that you would like to solve? And the example I want to take to demonstrate the benefits of investing in this is Simple, which is a product that we have been working on the last 2.5 years. It is the largest thin sliced EMR, which exists in India, which is an EMR is an electronic medical record system. The special thing about Simple is that Simple is a product which rests on a nurse's smartphone. So it is being used in government facilities where usually you would see uh, big computer systems, tablets, and other equipment, which is not personally owned. With Simple, we took a very different approach where we tried to build the product, keeping in mind that a nurse probably should own the product on her phone so that there are no maintainability issues and ownership issues with that. The product helps longitudinally track hypertension of patients who suffer from uh, hypertension related diseases. And when we started working on this, one of the first things that we realized was that it's going to be an offline first environment. When the Simple is launched in tier 3 cities and beyond, and a lot of rural parts of India already. And when you immerse yourself in the context in which the product is being used, you understand the gravity of some things which are not very apparent early on. In this particular case, uh, we realized as soon as we went to the field that we're going to consistently operate in an offline environment where internet connectivity is going to be sparse. And one of the key features that had to be built into the app was, of course, going to be an overdue list where patients who are at high risk would be called by the nurses and would be asked to return to the hospital after a due period of time for a regular checkup. Now, while it was something that we already knew about India and the Indian infrastructure, that the gravity of this problem didn't really settle in until our engineering team was actually in the field. And we were tasked with solving a very interesting yet challenging problem: that how do you provide phone number masking so that the nurses' phone numbers are not revealed to the patients without an internet connection? Typically, a service like Twilio or a service like that would sort of play the intermediary, where the nurse would call and the service would route the phone, and the nurse's phone number would not be exposed to the patient. But how to do that without internet? Um, and a very interesting solution that our engineering team was able to come up with was what is known as dual tone multi-frequency. So if you are from if any time from the 80s or the 90s, you would probably remember when you would use your dial-up modem and it would make a weird sound while it was connecting to the internet. And that actually is known as dual tone multi-frequency, which is basically an ability which can be used for phone number asking by the nurses, where they call up the server, and the number that they are about to dial will actually, through DTMF, will be sort of routed to the patients. And the phone numbers of the nurses stay masked, even though there is no internet connectivity. So that's a little bit about, when you immerse yourself into the real context, you come up with solutions which are not really apparent or obvious, but just being within that context can be super helpful. Moving on, we also talked a little bit about how do you identify the right problems that you want to focus on. And this is an example of what we saw again in the field. We looked at patients in Punjab, and in Punjab, the second name is usually very common, which is usually Kaur, and the first and for women, and for men it's usually Singh. What we also realized was that taking a patient's age in a certain age bracket wasn't very helpful to be able to search for a patient, because most of the patients reported in the 60 plus age bracket reported very similar ages, where they gave us a ballpark number because they were not really familiar with their actual date of births. And the result is something like this, where you have multiple patients with the same name, not very well defined addresses, same gender, same age. And what do you do in such a scenario, right? We continued exploring this while we were in the field, and we realized that when we were about to launch in one hospital, we saw that there were about 5 to 6 people with the exact same name. But as soon as you would go up to a district level, you would have about 60 people with the exact same name, which meant that the idea of search would have been completely broken. Imagine having 60 people with the exact same name in your phone and trying to call one of them. How do you really find out, right? And because we were able to anticipate this problem upfront, or really, really quickly in our early days of building the product while we were in the field, we were able to come up with, again, solutions that eventually ended up working with us, where we ended up creating these blood pressure passports for patients, where they would have a QR code as well as some details that they would be able to carry forward to the doctors while the nurses entered their details into the app, which facilitated a lot better and faster patient search. Our aim in simple was to get to patient registry and patient search down to under a minute, which in a paper-based system can be up to 10 minutes. And in Indian clinical conditions, a doctor is only able to devote about 2 minutes to a patient. So if you are spending about 10 minutes searching for a patient and you only can devote just about a couple of minutes to look at them, it doesn't really add up. And a lot of patients ended up returning home. So knowing that we will have to work a faster and better search by being in the field early on was really helpful. And the final step in discovery, which is about creating a prioritized research funnel. This is a screenshot from our research studies in Simple, where we have been conducting a lot of continuous research studies. The whole idea is that you're not going and doing discovery just once, but you continue to do discovery time and again, so that the product continues to evolve as you push more features into the field. So by having a research funnel where you can sort of stack rank the most important initiatives, you know where and how to pick the next initiative that you want to work on. And that sums up discovery a little bit. And now that you sort of know what problems are worth solving, can go on and investigate them more deeply, which brings us to our next stage, which is investigation. And what is investigation? It is about designing worthy solutions for worthy problems. Uh, Worthy problems, of course, come from discovery, but the solution finding has to come by deeply investigating those problems. And why would you invest in finding solutions more deeply? So that you don't end up building anything that you shouldn't have built, as well as you know what exactly to build without building anything else. And I'll go a little deeper into this and try and explain what I mean by this. Um, yeah, and you start with exploring, which is about coming up with high level ideas on how to solve that problem. A couple of methods which are very useful for that are running a design sprint, which is a 5-day process where you start from a problem and a hypothesis, and then you continue working towards the end of the week, where you prototype certain solutions, and then you run a usefulness study with your consumers, where you just try to gauge high level ideas and how they appeal to the consumers. Um, if you find success in your high level ideas, the next stage that you move on to is investigating them a lot more deeply, which is in cover, where we run what we call design relays, which are nothing but design sprints, but extended over a period of 2 weeks instead of one, where we have a lot deeper focus on prototyping. And here, because you have some understanding of the initial idea and its success, you can go a lot deeper and try and run, which are studies which are typically known as usability studies. So you also understand not just how the idea works, but exactly how you want to design, say, the interface, or how do you want to communicate the features that you're trying to build. And the final step, of course, is you could have gained a lot of confidence through your user studies, in-person user studies, but it always makes sense to test what you're building at scale, which brings us to corroborate, where an hypothesis is tested and uh, validation is sought at a much larger scale. Um, an interesting example for this is the work that we did with Wikipedia just last year, which was about engaging the next billion users who have recently come onto the internet because of smartphone proliferation. And while the readership of while the smartphones have increased a lot in terms of their numbers and growth, Wikipedia has not seen a proportional growth in readership in countries like India and other sort of middle and low income countries. And we were tasked to figure out uh, what is it that is preventing users from looking at Wikipedia like it has been seen in more developed countries. So we started out here with a design sprint again, where we explored certain high level solutions and we continued exploring a lot of them. But one key problem that any content platform which is trying to build content in, especially in areas where it doesn't have enough content, for Wikipedia, that was vernacular languages. So, for instance, there isn't enough content in Punjabi on Wikipedia, and because of that, there aren't enough contributors. Wikipedia is completely community run, so that leads to a chicken and egg situation, because there isn't enough content, there aren't enough people who are flocking towards the platform, as well as because there aren't enough users, not enough content gets created. So we looked at what could be a high level idea that we could explore to solve this chicken and egg problem for Wikipedia. And Wikipedia has a really nice thing, which is its fact section. And if you have opened a Wikipedia page ever, which I'm sure everybody here has, it has a fact section on the right if you're in the browser or on a laptop, or if you're on your phone, it's sort of the first thing that you see, which is a little bit about, if it's a personality, it's about their life, their achievements, their spouses, etc. And During the course of our research during the sprint, we realized that most people are actually largely interested in just the facts section. Uh, and because facts are just that, they are facts, and these articles already perhaps exist in English or other popular languages, converting them into other vernacular languages could be, you could sort of reduce the lead time of that conversion a lot. And because you could do that, you could start generating and churning out content really, really quickly. So we wanted to see if we could use this particular uh, idea to solve this problem for Wikipedia. Once we had this high level idea, we wanted to go deeper and understand how we could really leverage the fact section to solve that problem. So we went to people's homes and in smaller cities like Indore and Varanasi, uh, we tried understanding consumer behavior through field research, where we looked at how they use their smartphones within the context of their homes. What was interesting was that a lot of people um, are used to new media platforms like TikTok and Instagram, where content is far more visual than you would see on Wikipedia, where it's a lot more long form, and people aren't that interested in reading overall. So we asked ourselves, how could we sort of leverage all of that information, turn Wikipedia facts into behavioral patterns that are already successful in these markets. So we took the facts and we created content in the form of stories, timelines. What you see on the screen is an example of a story where what would be, say, MS Dhoni's achievements are done in the form of, say, like Instagram stories. And looking at content this way was far more natural for these users than reading it in long form. So that's a little bit about how you could go a little deeper, uncover the problems that you're trying to solve, investigate them in a little more depth. And then finally, while you might have gained some validation through your field research and user testing, it's important to try these things out at scale. So right around the Cricket World Cup, we wanted to corroborate what we had learned, and we launched an experimental site for Wikipedia at where users who were seeking live cricket scores would end up coming to the website just because of searching for a live score. And then this was an interconnected experience, which was basically Wikipedia articles done in Hindi and Tamil, just to see how they play out. The version that you see right now is in English, but on the top you see you can switch language right from the top to Hindi and Tamil. And the overall idea was to see if people respond to these rich media like patterns really well. And using this method, we were able to understand a lot better at scale what ideas were functioning well and what were not. And this further became sort of a long-term initiative at Wikipedia, where the new readers team is continuously working on this. Okay, that brings us to the next stage. Now that you have uh, understood how you might want to solve your problem, that you had identified early on as one of the key problems to solve for your product, how do you create a strategy that's going to serve it going forward? So what is strategy? It's about turning ideas into strategic business initiatives. And why would you want to do that? Simply because you want to align everyone in the service of a common cause. You want everybody to be working towards the same product goal. And how do you do that? So by this point, you have had some evidence of your ideas work. You have tested them out at a small scale, but do they actually make a ton of business sense, right? So we again do these in 3 steps, where we analyze if the explored idea makes sense for business, what all will be required to make by the business to make it work. A couple of quick ways of doing that is what is known as Presto analysis or competitive benchmarking, looking at competition which is in a similar space, and then turning that around and mapping everything that's related to the idea. So not just looking at the journey of the user, but the journey of all the stakeholders involved when they're interacting and participating, and building out really detailed persona of us. And of course, this is not the only place where you should be doing this. You could also start with journey mapping and persona development very early on, and you should have a lightweight persona. But these are sort of milestones. By this time in your strategic thinking, if you don't have a very detailed persona and a very well detailed journey map of all your stakeholders, then it's time to sort of go back to the drawing board and make sure you have that. And once you have all of this, you also want to ensure that uh, all stakeholders are sort of working together in a way that they all align together. And this is not just about stakeholders who are external, also internal stakeholders, internal teams. So, it leads us to creating a lot more alignment diagrams and service blueprints, and I'll touch upon the benefits of doing that in a bit. The example I want to take here is Swiggy, and Swiggy was a product that we helped build very early on. So we helped build the first ever version of Swiggy and continued working with them for some time in the future as well. The first thing that we wanted to do here was that we said that we don't just want to map the journey of the user, but what if we sort of looked a little at a little abstract layer and said that we would want to map the journey of the food. And today it seems like a status quo where you do expect your food's journey to be told to you when you are ordering food on a food delivery app. But this was 2013, 2014, and uh, a lot of delivery executives that today bring you food did not have smartphones at the time, and smartphones were not uh, also very as high end as they are today. So the biggest question to answer was, what is the business feasibility of smartphones for delivery executives? The way food used to be delivered back then was that you if you are ordering in, you probably have a pamphlet from a restaurant that you are looking up food in, and then you call the restaurant and they send their delivery boy to your house with the food. You had no way to know how much time it would take for the food to be prepared. You had no way to know when would the delivery executive reach you. You had no way to basically gauge. You probably also didn't know how far the restaurant was from your home. So you had no way to gauge from the time you picked up the phone till the time you got your food, what transpired and how much time it would really take. And if today you were asked to sort of order food like that, I'm sure a lot of us would find that really painful and not not the best way of doing it, right? But to make all of this happen, one of the most important things was that a delivery executive had to have a phone. And the business feasibility at the point was questionable, but at the same time, it had a lot of potential benefits that we wanted to sort of initiate, and that bet was taken. And long story short, uh, you had your food's journey in your hands. But making this happen, of course, wasn't all that straightforward either. Right? Mapping the journey of the food wasn't just about wasn't really about mapping. You can't really map the journey of the food. You're just mapping the parts that are involved, right? And for that to happen, a lot of stakeholders had to be aligned. So the track your food feature would require a strong alignment from the consumer team, the driver team, restaurant team, customer support team, all of which you are probably used to if you order food from Swiggy today. We have probably interacted with some of these teams in some shape or form. And that sort of brings us to the next stage, which is once you have strategic alignment on what you want to build, how do you turn that into a tactical action plan, which is translate? Uh, it is about converting strategy into a tactical action plan. And why would you do it? Because you want to create clarity on outcomes and expectations. Businesses often need to know when they will uh, be able to deliver certain features so that they can align other initiatives like sales and marketing with those release dates. And again, it's about doing these three things really well. The first one being define. It's about defining success metrics and product KPIs against which the success of the product can be measured. And this is very crucial because without a clear definition of what success looks like, it can be really hard for everyone on the team to work towards that goal. The next step is planning, which is about building a product roadmap and prioritizing it. And there are several techniques and models that you could use for that. I'm not going to go too deep into those. But what is important is the relative prioritization of the features that you are about to build, and how do they sort of connect back to larger business objectives, which is where OKRs come in. And finally, it's about ensuring that teams have the right budget and the right resources that they need to do the work. Sometimes very specific resources need to be made available to achieve certain goals. The example I want to talk about here is Myntra, which again was something that we had built in 2014, 2013, something like that. And at the time when we were working on Myntra, internet connectivity in the country wasn't super reliable. Even in 2013 and 2014, you would end up switching to your 2G network quite often. Now, the task was to come up with an online fashion store, which is very visual in its nature. But at the same time, it had to perform in low network connectivity for a very reliable experience. And had that not been defined within the product KPIs very early on, it wouldn't have probably gained the attention that the initiative needed. And the risk there could have been we would have had an app which worked really well on in good networks, but failed completely when you were sort of browsing on the go where you didn't have a great Wi-Fi connection or good internet connectivity. The next step, of course, is planning, which is about road mapping. Great roadmaps often involve looking far ahead into the building of a feature. And one of the things that was very useful in Myntra while we were building it is that during the road mapping exercise itself, it had been thought through by the team that the experience had to evolve with use. Today, we take it as something which is very common. But back in the day, creating a dynamic consumer experience on low-end smartphones wasn't really that common or easy for that matter. And finally, it's a little bit about making sure that the teams have the right resources that they'll probably need, because we were working with low-end smartphones at the time, which were also quite expensive. 20,000 rupee smartphone in 2013-14 is probably just a equivalent of a 5,000 to 6,000 rupee smartphone today. So driving performance engineering on such smartphones was again a key initiative that had to be taken up. And it wouldn't have happened had we not really focused on making sure that we focused on equipping the teams with everything that was necessary. That brings us to the next stage, which is about accomplishing what you have already planned so far. And it's about building the right product, but not just that, it's also about building the right product machinery. To make delivery smooth and predictable, you want to invest a lot in this stage as well, right? If you have followed some of the previous steps, it's highly likely that you have built something that's relevant to your users. But you can't stop there. You have to ensure that your delivery machine is geared up for success. When you go into the real world, you should not have to struggle with bugs and release problems. So when you are sort of starting to see success, you don't want to be held back because your tech processes and the machinery to deliver product wasn't great. And this is relatively simple, but but not well followed across the industry. Uh, if you do these three things and you do them well, it's quite likely that you will build a product and a product machinery that continues to deliver features really well. The first step, of course, is scoping the product really well. It's about estimation and creating predictability for business, so that they're aligned on release dates. A key thing which is often missed is instrumentation, because it's treated as the orphan child. Uh, but if you have gotten to this stage and if you have invested in discovery, investigation, strategy, translation, it would be foolish to not invest in instrumentation, because you now want to see how your thinking is performing in the real world. But quite a lot of organizations, just because they want to launch fast, do not end up investing in this. Um, then build practices looking at architecture decisions in a way that allows feature development to happen in a way that new features are insulated from the existing code base. If this is about building a new feature and adding it to an existing product. Um, Definitely write tests. Nobody cares about them initially, but they are never written later either. Next thing you know, you have a successful product, but it's really buggy, and your NPS and App Store ratings plummet before they get a chance to even rise. And you don't want to be in that situation. And the final thing is building a release practice, which is about setting up the right practices that help continuous delivery. And the idea of continuous delivery is that no improvement should be held back. It's not just about pushing features, but bug fixes, experiments that your product team might be wanting to run. So this is having hygiene around your release practices can really help your product team experiment and grow the product a lot more dramatically than they would be able to if these practices are not in place. Um, Most recently, we employed all of this when during our work with Dunzo, which is probably one of the favorite delivery apps that uh, we have in the Indian startup ecosystem right now. And uh, when we started working on this again, we worked quite a lot with Dunzo, and our latest thing that we did with them was we helped them launch Pillion, which was bike taxi on Dunzo. And again, one of the things which was very important here was to be able to scope it out extremely well, so that the delivery of the feature happens really on time, so that the business initiatives are well aligned. And a lot of the work that we did with the team on scoping really helped create that clarity for product and business around the delivery of this. And we were able to hit this milestone quite comfortably. Um, the next thing, of course, is our build practices that we employed, which was about removing uncertainties while building for scale. Because it was a new feature that we were about to build, we wanted to make sure it's isolated from the code base and there is enough insulation built between Pillion and the rest of the Dunzo stack, which is already serving a lot. And in addition, of course, we invested a lot in writing very rigorous tests, so that later on, when that feature takes a life of its own and more things are layered on top of it, we don't have to suffer through the same problems new feature building usually does in a startup environment. And finally, establishing a culture of continuous delivery. So making sure that releases happen often and releases are not sort of held back because a major feature has to come in. What this helps with is that the team is always working towards a goal where it's releasing in a lot in shorter cycles, because of which if somebody comes in with a requirement in the middle of the process, it doesn't end up completely breaking that whole release cycle. In addition to this, we also created certain onboarding programs for the team where we were able to, at a cultural level, establish the idea of continuous delivery, where everybody would start speaking the same vocabulary because everybody understood how release cycles were supposed to be executed. And that has led to, I think, on Pillion, we have had only one major bug in over a year of usage so far, which is not a bad place to be in if you can get away with a single bug in your journey, in your product journey for over a year. The next thing, of course, is you've done the work, you've built it out, you've launched it in the real world, and now it's about nurturing that solution and helping it grow. And why would you invest in this again? Because this is the first time that you're probably going to learn about true product market fit by entering into the real world. So far, you have probably done some tests, some experiments at scale, but this is the first time the app is actually entering, or the product is actually entering the real world. And how do you nourish the product in its early days? Again, 3 steps. You learn from what's happening. So you don't wait for user feedback to come from data analytics only. You also go out into the field and see that multiple ways of doing that: field research, telephonic interviews, calling up customers to learn what do they like, what do they don't, going to customers' homes and finding how they use the app in the real environment. And of course, when it has gained significant user base, you can also start running certain A/B tests to learn what works better if certain ideas are not functioning as well as you anticipated them to be. Then you sort of invest in improving, which is about running usefulness studies and usability studies, where again you figure out, oh, these were the ideas that perhaps could do better, and then you go back to the drawing board, you create digital prototypes, you take them back to the consumers, and you try those out. And finally, once you have figured that out and you have put them back into the app, one of the other things that you have to do in the early days of product is you have to really promote your features well. So it's turns into product education and feature-based onboarding. It's often creators think that they'll build something and people will just start using it, but in reality, you have to do a lot of work to get people to start using it as well. Especially if you are in a segment where people don't really know what is this new thing that has just come out. An example here would be the work we did with Flipkart when we helped them launch Too Good. And it's an interesting story because we were supposed to sort of leverage the existing stack of Flipkart to build a refurbished platform. Too Good sells refurbished electronics, and Flipkart had sort of had a lot of learnings in the e-commerce space. Of course, they're the largest e-commerce player in India. And we were supposed to use the learnings from their e-com journey so far and then apply it to a new product, which wasn't dramatically different, but at the same time, everybody felt that you can't sell secondhand products on the existing Flipkart sites, which is why Too Good had to be built out. And looking at what worked for Flipkart at that scale and what did not, we were able to sort of hit the ground running and build on top of a lot of good ideas that already existed. But then we were also very clear on what are the things that we really need to learn more about, which is when we sort of seek to find what would be the right product market fit for a refurbished platform. And here again, we went to the drawing board, did a lot of co-creation with users, and tried to understand what is the ideal version of an app that would where they would come to buy refurbished electronics. And one of the key initiatives here was also category creation, which was until Too Good had come into the space, categories like unboxed, refurbished were not very well known. As a result, a lot of people were not familiar with what does it mean when you say this phone is unboxed, or what does it mean when you say this phone is refurbished, but it's in a very good condition. It's refurbished, but it's in an okay condition, and so on and so forth. Um, when you have the leverage that you have with a platform like Flipkart, your responsibility is, of course, to sort of create that category as well. And we had to invest a lot in educating users on what these categories would mean, because this was the largest initiative of its size in the country at that point. And through videos and education and a lot of writing on uh, policies on buyback and sort of exchange, as well as what would be the condition of these of the electronics which belong to different categories, we were able to sort of establish them as a new status quo of refurbished electronics in the country. Um, the next thing I want to talk about is how do you turn the ideas that you have grown, and how do you sort of reap those benefits at scale. And of course, you want to invest in it because you want to build a unbeatable product and tech dominance, so that you can now start leveraging all the work that you have done to establish yourself as the market leader. That's sort of why where a lot of startups want to eventually go to become market leaders in their category. And a few things that often come in the way is by the time you reach that hit that scale state, it is likely that a lot of things will now start breaking. So how do you stabilize them? Uh, Couple of good ways to understand what needs to be stabilized is you looking at analytics and looking at NPS and CSAT scores to understand more deeply what can really be improved at scale. Um, the next thing, of course, is once you have been able to stabilize the platform, how do you at this by this point you probably now know a lot that's going to happen in the future as well. You can see a lot far ahead if you have reached where you are in your scale journey right now. And it then becomes a little bit about uh, systems expansion and architecture redesign. How do you make sure that whatever you have built continues to scale well in the future as well? And then how do you sort of ensure that you drive performance and you really make the best of the service or the product that you've built? And multiple ways again of driving performance is doing engineering optimization and design optimization, running multivariate tests, which can be expensive, but then they can sort of give you second by second evaluation of where you want to invest in making your platform better. In 2016, we had the chance to work with Gojek on their driver app. And Gojek is Southeast Asia's probably one of the largest super apps at this point. Um, when we started working together, a lot of things that needed stabilization were how do you remove impediments from the driver's journey. So what you see here right now is that earlier in the app, a driver would be tasked to sort of upload a receipt if they were going to bring you, say, food. And unless that receipt got uploaded to the server and reached the consumer and the consumer approved of that, the driver couldn't actually move from their location. Uh, Removing impediments like this and doing all that upload in the background was really helpful in getting in enhancing the consumer experience, because the consumer got the product that they had ordered faster, and at the same time the driver was not blocked, right? So this is just one example of where stabilization played a role. There were several other initiatives where once you have hit that scale, a lot of these smaller problems start reappearing again and again on a daily basis, and then you have to invest in solving them. Once you have stabilized, the next thing, of course, is to do is to come up with a more expansive system that is going to continue to help scale the product. That at the time when we worked with Gojek, they were doing 6 services on the platform. At this point, I think it's about 16 services. And we were also tasked to work with the team on building an architecture, both on design and making it work with engineering, that would continue to scale well. In Gojek's journey, every product had been added one product at a time. They started out with I think bike taxis, and then food was added, and then shopping was added from supermarkets, etc. And everything had a slightly different flow. And because of that, all services were beginning to look like different products. And at that time, Gojek also knew that they were going to scale rapidly, and they had a lot of other things going on, like fitness, bringing a masseuse to your home, just being able to deliver any sort of parcel from one place to another. And we had to look into that and sort of build a system that will continue to serve all of that in the future. And finally, it came down to optimizing at a second level. So when a Gojek driver would take more time to accept an order, that would also sort of affect the consumer experience, because the consumer would be waiting for the order to be accepted in that time frame. And given the sheer number of orders that Gojek sees every day, every second does count. And here what you see is on the left is what Gojek used to look like, and on the right is what we did when we were working with them on the new driver application. And we looked at every piece of information that existed, and what would take up to about 16-17 seconds to comprehend when a driver would get an order. We were able to bring it down to under 10 seconds, which is quite a lot of time saved per order. And if you look at millions of orders a month, that's a lot of time saved for the consumer, which then goes on to affect CSAT and NPS ratings, which again, define the success of the company at that scale. And last but not the least, is about you become a successful business and you want to figure out how do you stay relevant, right? And every business sort of goes through this. What worked for you a few years before is likely going to stop working for you now. So how do you keep up with changing times and trends? And how do you stay relevant and again establish category leadership and continue to be in that seat, and so that you're not uprooted from that seat by other startup. And this is sort of the journey of each startup. They sort of uproot the current incumbents, and then they become the new incumbents. And if they are not really evolving continuously, somebody else comes in and takes that place. So how do you sort of counter that? One of the key things, again, if you need to evolve your product, is you need to be able to predict the future. You need to be able to analyze trends. You need to be able to look at leading indicators that are indicating that something is about to change, or the product is not functioning as well as it used to, or in the future it might not, right? Once you are able to predict what the future looks like, you then have to run a lot of experiments to figure out what do you do. And once you have those experiments figured out, you go ahead and modify the product, which of course requires, again, certain times tech revamps, as well as looking at, again, experimentation through engineering and sort of updating the tech stack to be able to perform really well, as well as leverage new technology that keeps coming into the market. A good example of this would be OLX, which is India's largest consumer-to-consumer marketplace. when we worked with them in 2016 again, uh, OLX had been able to predict that a lot of their customers were uh, buying only if or would only buy products if they were in the close vicinity of the seller. And this is different from a typical classified website, which OLX was in the past, where you would see an ad and then you would try and get in touch with the seller and then you would figure things out. But what that led to was that OLX realized that if most number of conversions happen because people are in close proximity to each other, what can we do about that? And we're able to use all that data and insights to pivot the customer experience from a very classifieds first approach to a very hyper local app, where you would be able to look at everything which is within close proximity to you first. And unlike how, again, classifieds ads used to be, we turned this into a browse experience instead of a search first experience, which is how classifieds products used to work in the past. What that did was that search is a very active behavior. We were able to turn that into a very passive consumer behavior where you are just browsing through a bunch of things that are available to you nearby, and you're not looking for something specifically, which you would on a classified site where you would go and search for a phone. But here you are really looking for something to upgrade your lifestyle. And it's about convenience and just about small upgrades at a great price. So we were able to identify that deal seeking behavior through experimentation, where we again did a lot of consumer research and figured out that people have that deal seeking behavior on C2C uh, uh, second-hand products platforms, and they are not really necessarily looking for a specific thing all the time. And sort of that became our experiment. And then eventually we were able to take that and really bring in new technology uh, to make the best of it. Where what we were able to do is we were able to look at a new AI-based uh, image recognition platform, which would be able to look at the images and be able to actually very quickly tell to the consumer what exactly that image was. What that did for us was when ads were created, a lot of people would not want to feed in a lot of details because that made the ad creation process really, really cumbersome. So what we were able to do was that in the ad creation process, we were able to bring this upfront and make taking picture of your product the first step. And as a result of that, the tech would be able to get the color and other metadata about the product. Like in this case, you see that it's a silver laptop with a black keyboard, which becomes a good description to start out with. And that in some shape or form enforced the seller to look into changing the description if they were not happy with it, which led to better ads being created, which further led to better supply demand matching. So which ended up changing the behavior on the buyer side, because the buyer could see the right set of products based on their preferences because the metadata existed. And uh, that sort of brings me to the end of the presentation. Thank you for listening, and we can take questions after a quick break. Maybe I'll hand it over to Vinayak now.
Thanks, Dhruv. We have actually a bunch of questions. So I'll just quickly go into them. Just give me a second.
Sure.
Yeah, so we have this 8-point framework. What Shabir Abbas is asking is, in the case of multiple requirement change, which impacts the overall workflow, how do you effectively manage the roadmap? Because requirements can keep on changing, right? So how do you kind of incorporate? I think you answered partly in Evolve as well, but Maybe you can take that question up.
Right. That's very typical. That requirements continue to change because you launch something and you learn that it probably doesn't work as well in the real world, and that's where the changes come from. Which is why you consistently sort of invest a lot in discovery and investigation, so that you are very sure of your ideas early on, and those requirements aren't as likely to change in the future. So a lot of organizations, and this is sort of very common, especially in the startup ecosystem that you and I operate in, Vinayak, is that we are all creators and builders, and we think that we know what the consumer wants, and quite often you will hear I'm the user, right, from somebody in business or somebody in tech, right? Whereas actually the user might find many different ways of using the product that you're not aware of, right? OLX was a good example of that, going from a classified site to a hyper local marketplace, right? Which is not a thing that was imaginable at a certain time, but as soon as smartphones started becoming big in India, people's browse behavior changed, and that basically had to change the roadmap again. So if you're aware of certain stages of evolution as well as discovery and investigation, those three stages sort of tie together. What do you need to change in the roadmap? And being able to prioritize your discovery funnel really well also helps a lot, where you can say these are the problems which are sort of top priority to solve. So any problem that comes into the roadmap from somewhere has to go through that discovery and investigation cycle first, is how we take it. That go to the consumer, talk to them, figure out if this is going to, if your ideas are right. If they are right, what is the business leverage, which again goes into strategy. Figure out if there is enough business advantage to doing that. I don't know if it sufficiently answers the question.
Yeah, no, I can completely understand, because I think there are many times as a startup grows, the mix of users constantly changes, right? And I think one of the things
Right.
of being a founder, and especially a product person and a design person, both, you need to understand how that mix is changing, and the product has to evolve to kind of help that mix, right? And there are various ways of doing. You can look at reviews on Twitter. You can do user research ever once in a while.
Right.
You get
Right.
information through the field, people in the field. So there are various ways of getting it. Yeah, so I can completely relate through my own journey. I think Dhruv, another question from Mithun is, I think many of the examples that are given were from the B2C space. Do you have any specific insights on the B2B space, and how applicable are maybe some of these learnings to the of B2C to B2B? I'm expecting at least quite a few of them are applicable, because eventually users are the
Right.
same regardless of whether on the B2C side, because as a user I'm the same person, right? I don't see an app as a
Exactly.
B2C or a B2B.
Exactly.
Yeah, so
Exactly. You took away my answer, Vinayak. But just to add to that, on the other end of the screen is still a human being, right? And now that human being is used to a certain kind of experience. So B2C products have done a phenomenal job of getting to a very high quality customer experience, whereas B2B still it has changed a lot in the last few years, but it still sort of operates in the world of training on how to use software, and then relies heavily on customer support. And I've used a lot of products which are not as great, which rely heavily on customer support as well. I think if you want to build a modern age B2B startup, I think there is no escaping the fact that you want to be able to solve the right customer problems. One of the common pitfalls in B2B is going to customers for research, and then them sort of forcing you into the idea of building specific features for them, because the ticket sizes are usually larger there. So what ends up is in B2B a lot is that a lot of before the product takes shape and sort of has its own philosophy figured out, it becomes a too many cook situation where a lot of ideas come in as feature requests from early adopters, and then the product gets really bulky, and that's very common, right? If you look at, as soon as you think of B2B, you think bulky software. There are very few exceptions like Basecamp, Asana, Trello, where it has stayed very lightweight software, and they're very opinionated about those philosophies. They don't change their software dramatically as we do. And in the Indian startup ecosystem, this is a very common disease to go to consumer in the B2B space and then come back with requirements and then build them in without thinking through that. So for me, it applies. And in my latest role at X210X, I was heading product there for about a year. We built two B2B products where we use the exact same framework. So
Interesting.
yeah,
Yeah, and
we
I
are
think
practicing what you're teaching.
yeah, and I think the design sensibility of users, because the consumer apps have direct impact. I think many of the startups actually now use design as a differentiating philosophy. So the
Right.
product may not have as many features, but just because it's easy to use,
Right.
people are actually going, and you see this with small companies, startups, and also big companies. So I think definitely the mindset is changing there for sure.
Right.
Another question from Mithun again is post-geo and demonetization. There are some seismic shifts in the B2B landscape. There's digital payments, easy internet access, proliferation of mobile devices. What changes did you see to your playbook to accommodate these shifts? I mean, yeah, I mean, no, I
Yes.
hear everybody talk about the pre-geo and the post-geo phase, right? Because
Right.
especially, for example, in the size of apps, and you used to optimize every little last kilobyte, whenever you integrated, maybe different SDKs or things like that. And now, obviously, I think that is not so much a focus, but I think the battle has
Right.
moved somewhere else.
So that actually is something that is not necessarily true all the time in my experience. Specifically, am I still connected, or is this a connection becoming choppy, Vinay?
Yeah, it's a real topic. I think we are okay right now.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Bangalore rains, so network connectivity issues always, even in broadband. Anyways, so yeah, just at the right time, right? You can't rely on connectivity in this country as much as you'd like to, and that remains one, our reality. Two, even in the post geo world, if you look at tier three cities and beyond, network connectivity has improved a lot, but you can't be careless with that. So a lot of the work that I talked about is still, simple is a recent project and still offline first. What I talked about for Mintra was, again, it's going to be a consumer platform where you're going to buy fashion and it's going to be very visual. So a lot of performance related stuff had to be done to make sure that it works on poor connectivity as well. So we continue to operate with the assumption that internet connectivity in the country is sparse. So we sort of continue to optimize for that, not as much as we used to, but I think we still do that quite a bit. In the B2B space, I think it's not as much of a concern because you're in front of a computer which is often connected to a broadband where the connectivity is a lot better usually. Yeah, but the other impact the sort of geo situation has had on the country is internet has become really cheap, which means that broadband connections are much faster because you can afford much faster connections at the same price point. So that definitely you have a little more wiggle room now to do fancy things on products. But again, then are you optimizing? Can you stage? Can you gate it in a way that it is definitely going to do this much in poor connectivity and then do a lot more, rather than building a feature which only works in great connectivity?
Cool. A couple more questions. So Soumya Sagarika commends you for the insightful presentation, and she asked, since you talked about conducting co-creation activities, can you share some of your learnings from the field, working with the population who are first-time smartphone users, and what were the differences and similarities working with such a population?
So the tricky thing about first-time smartphone users can be, so for instance, Gojek was first a lot of first-time smartphone users, and all of a sudden they're brought to a very complex software. right? They are supposed to serve at that time, 6 different types of orders. Today, 16. On an app, which at that time, which was on a 3.5-inch smartphone in the middle of rain, sunlight, dust, and their livelihoods dependent on it, right? At the same time, now that they have a smartphone, they are going to go to apps which come pre-installed, like WhatsApp, YouTube, in a lot of these Android phones, Facebook related apps, which are again Instagram, Facebook, and so on and so forth. One of the most interesting things that I've learned is that a lot of those users don't they think of these apps as something that is a part of their smartphone. A lot of them don't even realize that these are apps that can be downloaded. Somebody, in a training center will download their work app, which might be, say, in this case, the driver app, etc. But they don't really, in a lot of cases, know where does Facebook come from on their phone, or where does Instagram or WhatsApp come from on their phone. It's almost like SMS for them, that it's just a thing which exists on the phone. Because of that, their interactions are very limited to a certain kinds of apps in that uh, in that market segment, and you have to sometimes model your work on those apps. So in Simple, because WhatsApp was the most used app by the nurses that we were working with, Simple looks very similar to WhatsApp in its interface approach, at the top, at least on the home screen. Likewise, Payal Arora, who's the author of this book called Next Billion Users, she talks about this concept called fabulousness, which is that the next billion user is not just expecting usability and use. They are also looking for fabulousness, which is entertainment and being able to play around with their phone. And that we saw as a pattern which became important in our work with Wikipedia, where people are so used to rich media content now, like TikTok and Instagram stories, being able to just passively look at content flowing through their phones, that they're not very used to long form reading, even when they are readers in other walks of life. So those would be sort of my top two learnings, that the most used apps, you have to, if you want your work to be successful, sometimes you have to model them on top of those mental models.
Okay, I think last couple of questions, the second last question. Given the times we are in, what are the challenges you're facing working with the population who are not tech savvy to come on board for virtual interviews and co-creation activities, especially in these COVID times?
Yeah, so it has been challenging, but I think our research team has done a phenomenal job at actually getting a lot of people to come online for co-creation and interviews, etc. So we haven't really, it's been challenging, but we haven't really faced that problem where people have not come to sort of work with us on research. We still have been able to recruit them. Yes, there are sort of the artificial screen creates a certain challenge in terms of being able to learn very authentically. It takes a lot more effort now. So for instance, in the middle of a research study, uh, they might not be able to share their screen. So you might have to share your screen and ask them questions, and they would tell you what to click, which is not as natural as them clicking something, right? But at the same time, if you invest a lot more time into it, allow them to speak their mind out, the results can be very similar in nature. And in fact, we have seen that a lot of, in our research practice, a lot of people have been more vocal than they were before, because now the medium sort of enforces that. So there are those advantages as well. Um,
Sure. And last question comes from Arunima Gupta. She asks, how do you ensure security and data regulation compliant for app? Especially, I mean, we have seen a bunch of data breaches also. So I think, especially in the B2B world, I think this is like super important, but also important B2C world as well.
right, right. So I think we always working with organizations that have a lot of that in place already. So we are an experience first team. So we mostly do work on front end and on product and design. We have handled that, but not so many times where I would say I have an approach of handling that. And plus, I'm sort of the product co-founder, so I'm. This question would be better answered by somebody like Pratul, who's a tech co-founder. But maybe you could talk a little bit about that, Vinayak, yourself, given your experience of doing this a lot.
Yeah, so I think the number one thing, I think there is this beautiful blog post that I keep quoting. I think my team, if they're on the call, they would have heard me saying it's like data is toxic, right? By Bruce Nair.
Mm,
So basically,
mm,
when you collect data, I think there is a, especially in the consumer startup, there is a propensity to collect as much data as needed in the hope that it will get used sometimes. But data is in some sense a
right,
lab, right? So you
right,
actually should collect as minimum data as necessary for you to work with. And that seems very counterintuitive, but I think that is something that we have learned over a period of time, because I mean, for a long period of time we used to say data is the new oil, but I think the newest thing that we are hearing is like the data is the new uranium, right? Hard to handle, hard to keep safe, and
right.
can explode in your face if not handled properly. And I think this, as an industry, I think this insight has come through through very bad experiences, right? And I think that is the number one thing I would say in terms of data handling at rest. I mean it's a whole topic by itself, but I think if you think that data, rather than data is a new oil, I think data is a new liability or the new uranium. If you think in on those fronts and kind of minimize how much data you collect and whatever is needed, and also be able to and hence like minimize it, like whether by anonymization or by regular purging of data, I think that by itself can at least do help you partly as well.
Right. Right. And as a product, I can answer it from a product perspective is, like you said, unless you have an answer of what will you do with that data, I think it's not a great idea to collect it either, right? Because in some shape or form, you're also not being honest to your consumers, where you should only be collecting data where there is a requirement and you can deliver value to your customers based on that. If you are just delivering value to yourself and the end game is selling that data off to somebody larger, then that's an ethical boundary that at least we don't cross, of course, and we try not to work with people who are comfortable crossing that boundary either.
Yeah, I think I hope the data privacy protection bill is passed soon in the proper shape and format. I think
Right.
that's it from us. Actually, there is one more. We have to announce
Sure.
the
Sure.
social media challenge winner, and uh, if Kabir, you can put up the slide. Yeah, so the social media challenge winner is Mithun Shanbag. You will get a swag bag from Microsoft for startups very shortly, and it's great. I think Mithun also asked a couple of questions, so I think it's great to have him win this prize as well. With that, I think we have come to the end of our webinar. We will be back with another set of insightful presentation maybe in a couple of weeks. So watch this space, and thank you, Dhruv, so much. I think it was a very insightful presentation, and
Thank
I'm
you for
sure
having me.
many of us have used those apps, so we can now understand. You kind of, in some sense, parted the curtain and showed us what kind of happens behind the scenes to deliver a really, really good product. Thank you so much for that. Thanks.
Thanks. No, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me, Vinayak. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Dhruv. Bye.
Great. See you. Bye.